Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. As human beings, who have developed an awareness of our own existence including our own mortality, we are likely drawn to zombie stories, because on some level it allows us to deal with the fear of death. In a sense, the idea of confronting, defeating, and surviving zombies represents surviving death itself. Everyone loves zombie games, so here is the list my favorite zombies games. You should also check it out. DayZ is a multiplayer-only survival video game developed and published by Bohemia Interactive. The game was officially released in December 2018, and was released for the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 in 2019. The game places the player in the fictional post-Soviet Republic of Chernobyl, where a mysterious plague has turned most of the population into violent, infected. As a survivor, the player must scavenge the world for food, water, weapons, and medicine, while killing or avoiding the infected, and killing, avoiding, or cooperating with other players in an effort to survive the outbreak. The goal of DayZ is to stay alive and healthy during the conditions of the zombie outbreak that have befallen the in-game world. State of Decay is a series of third-person survival horror video games. The series was created by Undead Labs and published by Xbox Game Studios. There are 2 installments in the franchise, and an upcoming third game. State of Decay is a series of survival horror video games. All the games feature an open-world environment that is infested with zombies. The core gameplay loop revolves around finding and fortifying strongholds, explore the world to rescue survivors and collect various resources such as food and equipment, and defend the base against zombie attack. The second game introduces 4-player co-op multiplayer to the franchise. Unlike many other zombie games in the market, State of Decay is not about killing zombies. Instead, the player must try to avoid them, scavenge and manage resources and interact with other survivors. According to Jeff Strain, the founder of Undead Labs, the series explores the human element, how people interact with each other and make choices in a time of desperation and hopelessness. Following the release of State of Decay 2, Microsoft fully acquired Undead Labs, making it a first-party studio. It is working on the third installment in the franchise, which is set to be released for Windows and Xbox Series X/S. Dead Island is an action role-playing survival horror video game series, published by Deep Silver for Windows, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and mobile platforms iOS and Android. There are 4 installments in the series, with the latest one released on April 21, 2023. Dead Island is centered on the challenge of surviving a zombie-infested open-world island with a major emphasis on melee combat. Dead Island was originally announced at E3 2006, but was pushed back to 2011. It was initially released on September 6 in North America, September 9 in PAL regions, and October 20 in Japan. A standalone expansion, Dead Island: Riptide, was released in 2013, while a sequel, Dead Island 2, was released in 2023. It is an action role-playing game played from a first-person perspective. Dead Island takes place in Los Angeles in the midst of a zombie apocalypse. At the beginning of the game, players have to select from one of 6 playable characters as their player avatar, called a Slayer. Each of them has their own unique skills and abilities. They also have to choose from one of 2 defensive abilities, either learning to block hostile attacks, or dodge them. The game's world is divided into 10 different zones. While the player can freely explore each zone, they must travel between different zones through zone exits. As the player progresses in the game, they will also unlock fast travel points, allowing them to travel to different locations quickly. The Last of Us is an action-adventure video game franchise created by Naughty Dog and Sony Interactive Entertainment. The series is set in a post-apocalyptic United States ravaged by cannibalistic creatures infected by a mutated fungus in the genus Cordyceps. It follows several survivors, including Joel, a smuggler who lost his daughter during the outbreak, Ellie, a young girl who is immune to the infection, and Abby, a soldier who becomes involved in a conflict between her militia and a religious cult. The games use a third-person perspective in which the player fights against hostile humans and cannibalistic creatures with firearms, improvised weapons, and stealth. Game director Bruce Straley and creative director Neil Druckmann led development of the first game, The Last of Us, which was released for the PlayStation 3 in June 2013 and PlayStation 4 in July 2014. A downloadable content edition, The Last of Us, Left Behind, was released in February 2014 and follows Ellie and her best friend Riley. Druckmann continued to lead development of the sequel, The Last of Us Part 2, which was released for the PlayStation 4 in June 2020 and is set to release for the PlayStation 5 in January 2024. A remake of the first game, titled The Last of Us Part 1, was released for the PlayStation 5 in September 2022 and Windows in March 2023. A multiplayer game, The Last of Us Online, was in development before being cancelled in 2023. The series has received critical acclaim and has won numerous awards, including several Game of the Year recognitions. The first game has been cited as one of the greatest video games ever made, and the second won more than 320 Game of the Year awards. Games in the series are among the best-selling PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 games. As of January 2023, the franchise has sold over 37 million games worldwide. Days Gone is a 2019 action-adventure video game developed by Bend Studio and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment for the PlayStation 4. A Windows port was released in May 2021. The game is set in post-apocalyptic Oregon 2 years after the start of a pandemic that turned a portion of humanity into vicious zombie-like creatures. Former outlaw-turned-drifter Deacon St. John discovers his wife Sarah, having been assumed dead, may still be alive and goes on a quest to find her. Days Gone is played from a third-person perspective in which the player can explore an open-world environment. Players can use firearms, melee weapons, and improvised weapons, and can use stealth to defend themselves against hostile humans and cannibalistic creatures known as freakers. A major game mechanic is Deacon's motorcycle, which is used as the player character's main mode of transportation. Upon release, it received mixed reviews from critics, who criticized the story, mission design, and technical issues but praised the graphics, artificial intelligence, and Sam Witwer's performance as Deacon. Days Gone was a commercial success. It sold more copies than all of Bend Studios' previous games combined and became the 19th best-selling game of 2019 in the US. In 2021, it was reported that the development team had unsuccessfully pitched a sequel to Sony. Dying Light is a 2015 survival horror video game developed by Techland and published by Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment. The story follows an undercover agent named Kyle Crane who is sent to infiltrate a quarantine zone in a fictional Middle Eastern city called Haran. It features an enemy-infested, open-world city with a dynamic day-night cycle, in which zombies are slow and clumsy during daytime but become extremely aggressive at night. The gameplay is focused on weapons-based combat and parkour, allowing players to choose fight or flight when presented with dangers. The game also features an asymmetrical multiplayer mode and a 4-player co-op multiplayer mode. Announced in May 2013, it was released in January 2015 for Linux, PlayStation 4, Windows, and Xbox One. The game was planned to be released on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, but these versions were cancelled due to hardware limitations. At release, Dying Light received positive reviews from critics, with praise mainly directed at the combat, graphics, co-op multiplayer, navigation and the day-night cycle, while receiving criticism regarding the story, difficulty, and technical issues. The game was the best-selling title of January 2015 and broke the record for first-month sales of a new survival horror intellectual property. The game was a commercial success, having sold 20 million units by April 2022. Techland committed to supporting the game, and released downloadable content packs, content drops and free updates for the game several years after the initial launch. An expansion, titled Dying Light, The Following, was released in February 2016. The sequel, Dying Light 2, was released in February 2022. Dead Space is a science fiction horror game franchise created and directed by Glenn Schofield. Dead Space was developed by Visceral Games and published and owned by Electronic Arts. The franchise's chronology is not presented in a linear format. Each installment in the Dead Space franchise is a continuation or addition to a continuing storyline, with sections of the storyline presented in prequels or sequels, sometimes presented in other media from the originating video game series, which includes 2 films and several comic books and novels. Primarily set in a 26th-century science fiction universe featuring environments, weapons, and characters typical of the genre, the Dead Space franchise centers on a series of video games beginning with the release of the first Dead Space, which centers on Starship engineer Isaac Clarke and mutated undead horrors that surround him. A central theme in the games is the fictional cult religion, Unitology, and its fanatical adherents, who believe that information about an alien artifact called the Marker is being suppressed by EarthGov, the central political administration of Earth. Their primary goal is to use the Marker as a means to bring about the convergence, or complete destruction of humanity. The Dead Space video game series has been positively received. The first game in particular won a number of industry awards for the varied elements of its gameplay and development, and is often regarded as one of the best video games of all time by critics. From a commercial perspective, EA considered the video game series as a whole to have underperformed. After the financial disappointment of 2013's Dead Space 3, no further media for the franchise was produced until a remake of the first game was developed by Motive Studio and released on January 27, 2023. Resident Evil, or Biohazard in Japan and parts of Southeast Asia, is a Japanese horror game series and media franchise created by Capcom. It consists of survival horror, third-person shooter and first-person shooter games, with players typically surviving in environments inhabited by zombies and other frightening creatures. The franchise has expanded into other media, including a live-action film series, animated films, television series, comic books, novels, audio dramas and merchandise. Resident Evil is the highest-grossing horror franchise. The first Resident Evil was created by Shinji Mikami and Takuro Fujiwara and released for the PlayStation in 1996. It is credited for defining the survival horror genre and returning zombies to popular culture. With Resident Evil 4, the franchise shifted to more dynamic shooting action, achieved acclaim and influenced the evolution of the survival horror and third-person genres, popularizing the over-the-shoulder, third-person view. The franchise returned to survival horror with Resident Evil 7, Biohazard and Resident Evil Village, which used a first-person perspective. Capcom has released 4 Resident Evil remakes: Resident Evil 2002, Resident Evil 2 2019, Resident Evil 3 2020 and Resident Evil 4 2023. Resident Evil is Capcom's best-selling franchise and the best-selling horror game series, with 146 million copies sold worldwide as of July 2023. And that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and if you have any questions or suggestions, do let me know in the comment section.